picture you out there. In the last couple of hours, I've heard from people who are on the call. My cousin Jim is on this call. My friend Greg, who coaches for the Indians, is on this call. And most kind of in a fun way, the woman who is the maid of honor at my wife and my wedding 27 years ago is on the call. So I want to say hi to them, especially to the maid of honor, Bernadette Stiliadis, who has one of the best names. It's a fun name to say, Bernadette Stiliadis. So hi, everybody. We're here to talk about how to sustain and strengthen culture in the time of COVID. And two things right off the top, two sort of overarching truths here. Number one, it's really hard. It's really hard, you know, and we know how hard it is. We've all been in our families, in our businesses, in our communities, sustaining culture during this time. And it's almost like a bad riddle. Like, how do you create togetherness when you can't be together? And so really accepting that is the first step of this. We really have to accept that whatever we do in terms of building culture, it's going to be different and it's going to be hard. But the second point I want to make up top is that there is hope. There are some really cool and extraordinary things happening, some really cool tools that can be used to make that happen in a new way. And that's what we're here to talk about. So I want to divide up our time into three chunks. Chunk number one, I want to talk about an idea, kind of a mental model for culture, like what culture really is, and a model that you can see and feel. Secondly, I want to look at some habits, some really simple tips and skills that you can use starting tomorrow with your teams and your families and your communities. And then number three, I want to open it up for some questions if anybody wants to start a conversation. And occasionally I will be posing questions to you. So sort of be ready on your keyboards to add stuff in the chat room when I pose questions for reflection. So let's start. And I want to start by asking you to close your eyes and picture the best and most cohesive team that you've ever been on in your life. The most cohesive team you've ever been on. We've all had them, right? And don't picture who you were with. Don't picture what you were doing. Just picture the feeling of being on that team. Just the feeling, okay? So everybody got something. Maybe it was sports. Maybe it was theater. Maybe it was work. Maybe it was family. We've all had that, right? And it feels like magic. You can open your eyes now. It feels like magic, but it's not actually magic. It's a thing. And like anything, it can be measured. It can be measured. So let me ask you, that feeling you just felt, what do you think that was worth? Like if you measured it in performance, or if you measured it in productivity, or if you measured it in creativity, like how much better was your team because it had that feeling? And I'm asking you that question because I know the answer to it. Like there was this crazy Harvard study, and they looked at 200 businesses and they created matched pairs out of each of them, right? Matched pairs. So these two businesses are like two identical twins. The only difference between the two was that one had a strong culture and one had a weak culture. That was it. And then they tracked everything about these companies. They tracked their creativity, their stock price, their performance, their productivity. And the answer to the question, they measured net revenue over 11 years. And strong culture is worth 756% in net revenue over 11 years, 756%. By the way, I'm going with this is my new PowerPoint presentation. It was done by my daughter, Zoe, who has way better handwriting than I do. So 756% in net revenue. That's what that feeling is worth. That's what culture is worth. And that sort of nicely spotlights like why we're here. Like this is why we're here, to talk about this gap between weak culture and strong culture, between not having that feeling that you just had and having that feeling. What is that worth? And what if you could control that? What if you could control that? And especially now, like in this age of COVID, all of our teams and organizations and businesses, we were sort of playing a sport that we knew, right? We were either adding up to more, we were adding up to 756 or less. We were somewhere in that gap, right? Culture is just where people add up to more. And the most you can add up to is like around 756% more performance. We were all somewhere on that. We were all playing that game, right? And maybe we were good, maybe we were bad, but we knew where the lines were. We knew where the goal was. And now that game in the last 2 months, it's like our little soccer game has been moved to the Amazon jungle, and we can't see anyone and we can't find the ball. And there's pumas and shit. It's a scary, different place to be playing the culture game. So how do we do that? What is this space made of? And the best way to start, I think, is to start looking at the very fundamentals of culture. What is culture really? We use the word all the time, but what is it really? I want to explore this space between when people add up to less and when people add up to more, between 0 and 756. I want to explore that with you, and I want to do it with a story, and the story is about me. So when I was 9 years old, I was obsessed with a question. How do I get really, really, really good at baseball? Like, that's me, 9 years old, playing for the Astros. We didn't have any of the signs figured out. We weren't as good as the pro Astros. But my question, the thing I was focused on was, how do I get really, really, really good at baseball? Good enough, I had thoughtfully narrowed it down to 2 teams that I would play for. I would either play for the St. Louis Cardinals because they won all the time, or I would play for the Cleveland Indians because they never won. I quickly ran into 2 problems. Problem number 1 is I was growing up in Alaska. See the mountains and the snow in June? I was growing up in Alaska. So there's never been a big leaguer that came from Alaska, ever, 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 ever. Problem number 2, when I got to high school, I was being struck out by kids who had grown up in Alaska. And so I ran into this barrier, right? I decided if I couldn't be the best, I would study the best. And so I developed this career where I was a journalist, but focusing on the science of performance. And I basically went and visited people who were really good at stuff and took x-rays, like figured out what made them tick. I married a Cleveland girl, and Bernadette Stiliadis was our maid of honor. I married a Cleveland girl and moved to Cleveland 10 years ago. And I wrote a book called The Talent Code, which is about how skill is developed. And one afternoon, after that book came out, my telephone rang, and it was the Cleveland Indians. Like, they finally called me. And they were super interested in their small organization, small market. They can't buy good players. They have to build them, right? So they're interested in developing talent and adding up to more. And so 8 years ago, I took a position as an advisor for the Cleveland Indians part-time. And around that time, like, something strange happened, and it's not because of me, but the Indians got better and better and better and better and better and better. And you can add it up, over the last 7 years, we've won the most games in the American League, and we've spent $750 million less than the New York Yankees. So we're adding up to more. We're adding up to more. The ultimate measure of a culture. Do you add up to more? And we do. But it's not really, and I'm going to share my screen with you for a minute here. It's not really the numbers that matter in the end. It's really something bigger. It's the feeling that you get. The feeling that you get at certain times, like the bottom of the 8th and the 7th game of the World Series. We are going to continue to watch that for the remainder of the morning. So if you'd like to see that on a loop, we will just continue to do that. No, it's that feeling that is so magical. And that's the feeling that we really focus on when we're a part of a good culture. That's the fun part of it. That's the magic of it. And so that experience of being kind of on the front lines of seeing that happen on the front step sent me on this journey where I went around the world, looked at the best cultures I could find, the best cultures that were in the top 1% of what they did, and that had this, that were considered by experts to be really strong cultures. Navy SEAL Team 6, the IDO, Zappos, the San Antonio Spurs, a Serbian gang of jewel thieves actually was another one, and seeing what made them tick. But before we get into what makes them tick, we have to start where we're at right now. Like, when I say the word culture, a story pops into your head. Right? A story, an image, a mental model. And the mental model we have of culture right now is that, hey, it's kind of the soft stuff, right? It's that feeling of connection. It's like the personality of a group. Like, that's what we think of culture. And if you had to sort of represent that, culture is made of a lot of things. It's made of, values and integrity and trust and teamwork and cohesion and ownership. All this stuff, right? When we think of culture, we think of all of these things. The problem with this model is that this is not a very useful tool. Like, if your culture needs help and you come to me and you say, Dan, our culture needs help. And I say, I've got the answer. You need to do this stuff. Like, I'm not being very useful, right? I'm not being very useful. So this is like the menu at the Cheesecake Factory. Like everything is on it, right? This is not a useful tool. So it's ironic. Culture is by far the most important thing that we do in an organization, in a team, in a family, in a community. And yet our way of thinking about it is like very kindergarten-like. So I want to explore a different way of thinking about culture. And I want to do that by sharing my screen again and sharing an image of the best team, the team that I love the most that I encountered of all the teams that I visited. And this is a really fun team to watch. These are called Starlinks. They do this. It's called a murmuration. But don't focus on the beauty, because the beauty is really incredible. Focus on three things, three functions, three behaviors that are happening. Number one, focus on how connected they are. They're in. They're not going off in little groups of 2 and 3 to have a meeting. They are in. Number two, look how information flows in this group. Look how it flows, like from one side of the flock to the other, total transparency, no limits on information. Number three, look how they handle direction. Look how they handle direction. It's unbelievable how quickly they go, not sort of in a general direction, like exactly, true north, boom. And it's a flock of birds, but when you watch a SEAL team in action, when you watch Pixar make a movie, that's what it looks like. It's a group connected, sharing information and navigating through space, navigating problems. This is your culture at your best. This is any organization at its best. This is that feeling that you thought of when you closed your eyes at the beginning of this. That's what it feels like. So the lesson of that is really simple. The lesson of that is really simple. Your culture is not about what you say, about the words that come out of your mouth. Your culture is about what you do. Your culture is not about what you say. It's about behaviors. It's about behaviors. And there's 3 behaviors that determine the success or failure of any culture. 3 simple behaviors. They're right here. Behavior number 1, building safety. Building safety. Safety is how we stay connected. That function of connection, human safety. We've got wires deep in our brain that monitor and assess all the time whether we're safe or not. If we're not safe, we're out. If we are safe, we're in. Number 2, sharing vulnerability. How do we share information? Real information. We are vulnerable with each other. We don't hide. We don't hide. We are vulnerable with each other and open, and we share risk. We share risk. That's how we share information. And third, how do we handle direction? We do that with a sense of purpose. That's how we do it. We have a very clear sense of what matters most and how to get there. So these things work in a feedback loop. You can see safety and vulnerability work in a feedback loop. The safer you are, the more open you can be. And the more open you are, the safer you feel. So this is the model. This is like a mental model for the sport of playing culture. And it's also a model for your skills. How good are you at these 3 things? How good are you at these 3 things? And that's what we're going to talk about next. How to get better at these 3 things in the age of COVID. How to have behaviors that build safety, share vulnerability, and establish purpose. By the way, this isn't the only feedback loop you could use. You could use the model of demand, establish fear, demand obedience, and mandate direction. Like that actually works. It works for simple problems and it works for a little while. But if you're talking about building a cohesive, connected group of people, you need to connect through safety, you need to share information through vulnerability, and you need to decide where you're going by establishing a really clear sense of purpose. So we'll talk next about how we're going to go about doing that, about sort of a toolkit for doing that. But before we do, I want to ask you kind of a big question that you can add in the chat bar if you would. And it's a really simple question. What does belonging feel like? You've all felt it. We've all been in special groups like that. You closed your eyes and thought about it. What does it feel like? Accepted. That's really cool. Joy. I love that. Calm, safe, peace, safe, comfort. These are so great. I'm going to keep these. We'll make another word cloud out of them. Fantastic. Free to be me. That's good. Sense of value. So true. Team player, cohesive, inclusion, belonging, warmth. Oh, that's an interesting word. That's really great. While you keep filling it up, I want to get right into the first habit that we can use in this toolkit. And as we think about all these habits, that word warmth is key. And I think The whole key in this moment of COVID is to amplify warmth. That's going to be the power that you use to connect with your team. Amplify warmth. You've got to amplify it in this strange Amazon that we find ourselves. And habit number one, overthanking people. Overthanking people. Something, if you go hang around the San Antonio Spurs, most successful sports franchise in America for the last 25 years, the coach has this habit at the end of the year, Coach Popovich, who's a real grouchy guy sometimes, but he's incredible at other times. And at the end of the year, he goes to all of his players individually and he has a meeting with them. And he says these following words. He says, "Thank you for allowing me to coach you." It's an extraordinary interaction. Now, he's paid millions and the players are paid millions. Why would he thank them? That's what I want to explore with you. What does that create? What is he doing there? Now, I want to explore that through a story. And the story is about a guy named Peter Skillman who got obsessed with a question, which is, why are some teams better than others? And he was an engineer. He wasn't a scientist, he was an engineer. So he chose to explore this by a contest. And the contest was really simple. Who can build the tallest tower using the following materials? 20 pieces of raw spaghetti, a yard of tape, and a single standard size marshmallow. The only rule was that the marshmallow has to go on the top. But the interesting part were the teams that he chose. He chose teams, 4-person teams, teams of CEOs, teams of lawyers, teams of MBA students, and teams of kindergartners. Teams of kindergartners. And ready, set, go. 18 minutes to build the tallest tower. And all the adult groups start out the exact same way. They talk to each other. And someone has an idea and they put it forth and the others nod and smile. And then they improve that idea very beautifully. And then they divide up into roles very beautifully. And then they start to build very smoothly. And it looks smooth. It looks smart. It looks cooperative. It looks fantastic. Now, the kindergartners, on the other hand, don't exactly do that. They basically eat all the marshmallows except for one, and then they start jamming stuff together completely chaotically. And if you had to bet your salary on which group would win, most of us would bet on one of the adult groups, because that's our mental model of group performance. Our mental model of group performance focuses on what we can see. And when we see smooth, intelligent looking cooperation, we assume it's going to add up into good performance. And when we see chaos, we assume it's going to add up into bad performance. So I'm going to share my screen again let's see how that turned out, actually. Here's the study, group performance, tower height in inches. If you bet on the MBA students, you didn't do too well. If you bet on the lawyers, you did a bit better. If you bet on the CEOs, you did even better. But you all lost unless you bet on the kindergartners. They win and it's not very close. And when you see this in real life, it looks like an optical illusion. I did it at Google not so long ago, and it seemed wrong. It seems deeply wrong. But it's not wrong. It's right. Because our model of group performance, our mental model of group performance is wrong. Our mental model of group performance is wrong because it does not include the two most important factors. It does not include status management, and it does not include safety. The adult groups look like they're cooperating, but in fact, they're not. In fact, they're doing what humans have done for billions of years, which is to navigate our status with each other. We can't help it. We cannot help it. If you put us in a group, we've got to know. We have this craving to know, where do we fit in? And we devote tons of mental energy to figuring out, where do I fit in? Who's in charge? Is it okay to say that? We're built to do it with very powerful urges, subconscious urges. And as a result, there's a little whisper in the back of all the adults' heads as they navigate this, which is it limits feedback. It limits honesty. It limits teamwork. It limits creativity. Kindergartners? Nobody cares who's the CEO of Spaghetti Incorporated. Nobody cares. They just do it. They're completely safe. And the lesson is, it's not about how smart you are. It's about how safe you can be. And safety is delivered with us in the form of something called belonging cues. Belonging cues, that's the core language of safety. They're short, vivid behaviors that send the signal, I care. I see you. We share a future. You matter. And I want to tell a quick story about how those work. Some of you know the company Wipro. It's a call center. And for years, they struggled because they lost 50% of their employees every year. Every year they would leave. Retention was the huge problem. So they had to retrain half of their workforce. And so they tried everything to fix it, right? They built a better campus. They added benefits. They changed their training. None of it worked until, in desperation, they tried a 1 hour intervention. A 1 hour intervention. It went like this. They divided up the group of trainees into two groups, A and B. Group A got a standard hour of training. They heard about the history of the company. They met a star performer and they got a sweatshirt that said Wipro on it. Said Wipro. Group B, they flipped it. Instead of the session being about the company, it was about the trainee. So they asked the trainee, like, hey, what happens on your best day? Like, tell me. And they asked the trainee, what happens on your worst day? Tell me. And then they said, hey, if we were on a desert island and we were trapped, what skills would you bring to our survival? Like, can you build stuff? What do you got? And then they let the clock spin. Oh, and then the trainees in group B got a sweatshirt that said their name on it. If their name was Bob, they had a sweatshirt that said Bob. And then they let the clock spin 7 months to see if that affected retention. And the trainees in group B were 270% more likely to stay with the company than in group A. That 1 hour, those few signals sent really clearly at a distance in a class, created that moment of safety and connection. I see you, I care, we share a future. So let's look at some real practical ways to amplify our warmth, to do that, to create that, even in this age. I'll give you 3 of them. Number 1, send the 2-line email. Send the 2-line email. This is an idea from Laszlo Bock, who ran people analytics at Google. It's an email you send to your team, 2 lines. Tell me one thing you want me to keep doing, one thing you would like me to stop doing. That's it. Short email, but it's a big signal of closeness. It's a big signal of connection, wanting that feedback from them. Number 2, keep an open face. Keep an open face. A Navy SEAL commander told me this one. He said, look, your face is like a door. It's got 2 settings. It's got close, which we know what it looks like. It's when your brow is furrowed and you're thinking intently, right? And you're inside your own thoughts, or it's open. This is your frontalis muscle. And for a communicator, it's probably the most important muscle we have on our body. It's how we signal engagement, interest, energy, enthusiasm. This muscle, especially when you have a mask on, becomes even more important. It becomes even more important when you're communicating via Zoom. So I would suggest, one thing that I'm doing, it's really hard to look in the camera at Zoom. I find it really, really difficult. So I've got a picture of some friends that is just behind me there, and I'm using that to look at. So I feel like I'm kind of talking at them. I think that's a really simple hack to make sure that you're looking at the people that you are communicating with. So find ways to look at them. And number 3, embrace rituals that have nothing to do with work. Embrace rituals that have nothing to do with work. We're all at a distance. But the groups that I've seen that have navigated this most successfully have done some really basic things. And the one I'm thinking of right now is the Cleveland Indians. They have a group workout that happens every Friday. It's over Zoom. Every different person organizes each week. Everyone does calisthenics in their house, and it has nothing to do with work and everything to do with being together. A book club. This is a beautiful example of it. Look at all the programming on COA that has nothing to do with work and everything to do with being healthy and connected. So embrace those sort of rituals. So that brings us to, that's habit number 1, overthanking people. But that brings us to the question of like trust. Okay, if we create that connection, that's step 1. Now let's talk about trust. How do we build on that connection? How do we really trust people? So I want to start with a big fat question for you to answer, which is, what does trust feel like? Just type it in the chat bar if you would. What does trust feel like when you're in a high trust group, a high trust team? Complete, safe, confidence, comfortable, productive, respect, acceptance, freedom. That's a beautiful word. Exhilarating, flowing. That's so great. We're going to keep all these. Integrity, space to grow. Ooh, space to grow. Love it. Peace. Fantastic. Keep them coming. So I want to talk about habit number 2. The second habit will be going of the 3, sharing weakness. sharing weakness. This is a habit, something to amplify. And it really came to my mind when I was doing the research for the book. I went to visit Pixar. And at Pixar, the president and CEO, this guy named Ed Catmull, he founded Pixar. He's one of the smartest people in Silicon Valley, founded it with Steve Jobs. And we were walking around Pixar, and we were in this super cool building, right? It was a sort of relatively new Pixar building. It had all these little special features to it. They hide cocktail bars at Pixar. They actually have like you push on Nemo's nose and like a gin bar comes out of the wall. It's unbelievable. So we're walking around this building, and I'm looking around, and I say to Ed Catmull, "This is the coolest building I've ever been in." And Ed stops, and he turns, and he gets me eye to eye, and he says, "Actually, this building was a huge mistake." And I said, "What?" He says, "Yes, we made the hallways too narrow. We need people to stop and chat. We're a creative company. We need everybody to stop and chat. But we made them so narrow that people just shoot by each other. We made the atrium too small. People don't gather here for lunch. They go out. They go out to lunch. We need them here." And he listed like 10 other things. And then he said, "But the biggest mistake we made is we made all these mistakes, and we spent millions of dollars, and we didn't even realize we were making them." I mean, it was genuinely stunning. When you compliment most CEOs on their kick-ass new building, most of them say thanks, right? That's not what he's doing. He's sending a very different signal. So, and then a couple weeks after that, I found myself in Virginia Beach, Virginia, with a man named Dave Cooper. You've never heard of Dave Cooper, but he is the Command Master Chief for Navy SEAL Team 6. He trained the troops that got bin Laden. He's like their coach. And we're sitting down for breakfast, and Dave says to me, "You know the 4 most important words a leader can say? The 4 most important words a leader can say are, 'I screwed that up.'" And those 2 incidents really had a profound effect. Like, what are these guys doing? What signal are they sending with their behavior? Why are they sharing weakness like this? So I want to do a quick experiment with you guys. I want to explore that question. Why are they doing that through an experiment? And the experiment is really simple. And normally we would have you pick a partner, right? Normally we'd have you'd be on audience together, and you'd pick the person next to you who you don't know, and you would do this little experiment with them. It's called the 2-minute experiment. It's very small. And I see, can I repeat the 2 lines of the 2-line email? I see that in the chat bar. The 2 lines of the 2-line email are, tell me one thing you want me to keep doing, one thing you want me to stop doing. So the 2-minute experiment, to get back to that, we're going to pretend that you're with people. And the person we're going to pretend you're with is, of course, Bernadette Stiliadis. So pretend you're with Bernadette Stiliadis. You don't know her. She doesn't know you. And you're going to be in a room together, and you're going to ask, there's going to be 2 phases of this experiment, 2 questions. You're going to ask Bernadette a question, and she's going to answer. And then she will ask you that exact same question. We'll do this twice, right? So the first question, I want you to imagine you're in like the Love is Blind thing with Bernadette Stiliadis, and you're going to ask her this question, and she's going to ask it back to you, and you're going to have this 1-minute conversation about this one question. Here's question 1. Describe the last pet you owned. So we'll just take 20 seconds and picture that conversation happening. What exactly would you be saying? And imagine the kinds of things she might be saying to you. Describe the last pet that you owned. Okay. Next, it's time for question number 2. Now you're in a different place a little bit, right? We're going to do this second question right now. You're going to be with Bernadette Stiliadis again. And it is there something you've always dreamed of doing? Why haven't you done it? Imagine yourself asking her that question, and then she asks it back to you. Imagine that. Is there something you've always dreamed of doing? Why haven't you done it? Okay. Do you guys know what sociometers are? They're little devices that you wear during a social interaction, and they capture your energy. They capture the tone of your voice, the speed of your speech. They can capture gesture. They capture whether you're face to face with someone. And if we had had you hooked up to sociometers, those two phases, phase 1 and phase 2, would have had very different results. In phase 1, the energy, it's like a fingerprint of the social interaction, right? In phase 1, the energy would have gone up steady and would have leveled off, right? Your voice wouldn't have gotten super loud as you talked to Bernadette. It would have been fairly steady. In phase 2, you would have faced her more. There would have been more gestures. There would have been more energy in your talk. It would have been a completely different feeling. And the question is, why is that? Why is that? These are two questions, right? Why does it create such a different reaction? And the answer is vulnerability. There's a moment in number 2. There's just a moment in this question, right? Is there something you've always dreamed of doing? Why haven't you done it? You can answer this and maintain your status. But here, there's going to be a moment. There's going to be a moment of disclosure, a moment where it's going to change the interaction. And here's the crazy part. If we gave you guys a game to play, some kind of a challenge, the second group, your second self, who answered the second question, the more vulnerable question, would perform better. You'd be more in sync with Bernadette, number 2. You'd be more productive, which is kind of crazy. Because we normally think that trust and vulnerability work like this. We normally think that you've got to build up trust in order to be vulnerable. But as this experiment shows, we've got it exactly backwards. Moments of vulnerability are what create trust, are what ignite cooperation. That moment of shared vulnerability is what brings people together. And so the key in this moment of COVID is generating those moments of vulnerability. And we've seen it in our society at large. We've seen these extraordinary moments of connection that are happening because we're suddenly vulnerable. But smart cultures don't let that happen just randomly, right? They do it purposely. And the SEALs are one of the best. The SEALs do this by having what's called an AAR. It's called an after action review. After they finish anything, any mission, any training run, they circle up and they ask 3 questions. What went well? What went wrong? And what can we do differently next time? 3 simple questions. They pause, they reflect, they connect, and they're vulnerable with each other. It's a hard conversation to have. It's a really, really hard conversation to have, but it's probably the most important conversation you can have. Sheryl Sandberg likes to say, have you had a difficult conversation today? I love that question. Have you had a conversation where you've actually had to be vulnerable, actually had to share a risk? That's the question to ask. So in this moment of COVID, here are some 3 quick tools. All of them are basically the same tool, which is to deepen your curiosity. Your curiosity is your real power here. Deepen your curiosity about your performance and your openness about your performance and about your team's performance. Number 1, 3 tips here. Use AARs. Use AARs. Those after action reviews, they're so basic, so simple, but after you do anything, just take a second and reflect and think. And what could be better? What went well? What went wrong? And what can we do differently next time? Aim for warm candor and avoid brutal honesty. When you are brutally honest, you create a culture of brutality. Warm candor is 2 signals at once. Connection. Here's why I'm telling you this. Here's why I care. And candor. Here's the truth. And third, use the magic phrase. The magic phrase. It's a phrase we use all too little, but it's probably the most important thing you can say. People come to you all the time with questions, right? With questions all the time. And a lot of times we have this temptation to add value, to answer the question. But in fact, we should use the magic phrase, which is 3 words. Tell me more. Tell me more. The question isn't really the question. The question is just the tip of this big iceberg. And your goal is to surface that tension together. Surface the tension. Don't just answer the question. Say, tell me more. So we're down to the 3rd chunk of this, right? Those were 2 habits. We've got 2 habits of overthinking, of sharing weakness. And before we get into the 3rd habit, I want to ask you real quickly to type in the chat box, what does purpose feel like? What does purpose feel like? When you felt really purposeful on your team, when you've had an incredibly purposeful team, what does that feel like? Type away. Success, aim. Oh, that's a good word. Meaningful, valued, confident, committed, empowering, drive. Oh, this is so good. It's a switched on group. So I want to explore this one too. And this is going to be our third habit. Habit number 3, using corny mantras. Using corny mantras. Now, if you were to visit some of these places, you would expect them to kind of know their purpose. Like you wouldn't expect SEALs to talk all the time about what it means to be a SEAL, or Pixar to talk all the time about what it means to work at Pixar, but you would be wrong, because they do. They continually talk about their purpose. They continually talk about what it means to work there and to be that identity. And the question is why? Like, why do they do that? And to answer that, I want to tell you a story about, any group can succeed when the waters are calm, but every culture is really tested, like now, when we have a storm. And there's never been a storm like the one that hit Johnson & Johnson in 1982 with the Tylenol poisonings. Some madman put cyanide in unmarked bottles of extra strength Tylenol. 8 people died. Johnson & Johnson gets a call that their product is a murder weapon. What are they going to do? And what's incredible is what happens next. On the fly, Johnson & Johnson reacts like that flock of starlings. They invent and roll out tamper-proof packaging. In 8 weeks, they voluntarily pull $150 million worth of product from the shelves against the advice of the FBI. The FBI said, leave it. And they said, nope, we're pulling it. As a result, that is now the gold standard of crisis response. To this day, they responded perfectly. And the question is why? Like, how did they do that? And the answer is, if you roll back the tape, you'll find an executive at Johnson & Johnson named James Burke had spent the previous 4 years creating an all-company ceaseless conversation around one question: what comes first? What comes first? Because if you're a big company like that, a lot of things could come first. Stock price, the hospitals, contracts that we work with, the colleagues that we work with, medical research. What comes first? They had a consensus. They carved it into granite. What comes first is the health of the user of our product. They call it the credo. As a result of that process, of that clarity, when the crisis happened, they didn't have to debate. They didn't have to have a meeting. They didn't even have to be together. They all knew what to do. They all knew what to do. And of all the people that I've met who really embodied how to do that, the man Danny Meyer was one of the best. He built something called a mantra map. And I want to share it. He had his story. He had one restaurant. It was successful. He had a second restaurant. It started to fail. And the reason it was failing is that he was the culture. He was the culture, right? He couldn't be in 2 places at one time. He realized he needed to make his culture explicit. He needed to carve his culture into granite. So he started building something called a mantra map. And that's what I'd like to show you now. This is what he built. What's True North? Creating raves, not being successful or serving good food. Those are 2 really powerful, clear words: creating raves. And then how do we do that? Well, we read the guest, we find the yes, we collect and connect dots. This is my favorite. Mistakes are waves, servers are surfers. Like, they're kind of corny, right? And when I saw this, I thought the same thing. I thought, that's kind of corny. But then I was in a restaurant with Danny Meyer, and someone over in the corner, a waiter in the corner, dropped a tray of glasses and they smash on the ground. And Meyer stops talking to me and he starts staring into the corner. And I said, what are you looking at? And he said, one of 2 things is about to happen. Either they're going to come together and clean up this mess with goodwill, and the energy level in this restaurant is going to go up, and I'll know that the culture is strong. Or there's going to be a hint of blame, of anger, of resentment, and that energy level in this room is going to drop, and I'll know the culture here is weak. Isn't that genius? Like, talk about the perfect litmus test for a culture. A perfect litmus test for a culture. What happens when there's a problem? And that's when that beautiful mantra map started to make sense to me. Loving problems, the athletic hospitality, the excellence reflex. Those aren't corny. They're really genius, because they're building. Purpose doesn't live in your heart. It doesn't live in your mind. It lives on the windshield that you create. There's a series of like emotional GPS beacons that help your people know where true north is and know how to get there, the qualities, attributes, and traits to get there. So how do we do that? Let's look at a few traits. Your superpower in this area is really your power of reflection. This is what you need to do in the age of COVID. You need to be more intentional about reflection, because that's what builds the windshield. You need to reflect on the benefit you're creating in the world. One way to do that, build your mantra map. Every group has got a true north. Every group has got a way to get there. And co-creating a mantra map together can be, I've done it with a few groups. It's really fun. It's cool. You generate these corny sayings that end up really capturing who you are. Number 2, start each meeting by connecting to purpose. Start each meeting. We're having these remote meetings now. They're just, you sort of feel like we're floating in this outer space, like Raul on his background there. You're floating this outer space of Zoom. And really, we need to be grounded and find true north. Start each meeting, just take 30 seconds. I know a healthcare organization that tells a patient's story at the start of each meeting. Tells a patient story. Maybe it's a good story, maybe it's a bad story, but they tell a story at the beginning of each meeting. Really smart, really simple. What's your version of that? And speaking of stories, continually seek and share impactful stories. Stories travel, right? Stories are the ultimate drug, and they're the ultimate portable way to communicate culture. And most of the time we think of stories as something that are sort of haphazard and they're floating in the air and we grab them or not. We take sort of a free range approach. Now is a time to be systematic about stories. They're your most precious resource. Stories of success, stories where your lessons were learned. Find a way, keep a file on your phone, keep a bulletin board with your group, capture those stories, harvest them, use them and share them. So this all adds up to this picture here, right? We've got a model. We're building safety by amplifying warmth. We're sharing vulnerability by deepening our curiosity about ourselves and our team. We're establishing purpose by practicing reflection, by creating these reflective moments that we share and figure out what true north is, right? So this COVID thing is an unbelievable challenge. It's been like nothing else we've ever done. It's really, really hard. But my hope is that by reconnecting to some of this sort of ancient skill set of communicating connection, of communicating vulnerability, of communicating purpose, we can navigate this together. And I'd be super curious to hear what's working for your group. I think that's one of the most powerful things we can do at this moment is in forums like this to share ideas of stuff that's working, hacks, tools, simple ways of connection, of sharing that are working. So if people want to keep sharing that in the chat bar, I think that would be cool. If people want to connect with me, they can go here. And if people want to learn more about the book, they can get the book here. So I just want to say it's been a total delight, and I don't know how we're doing for time, Raul. I think we might be up against it, but if there are questions that people would like to ask, I'd be really happy to dig in.
Thank you so much, Dan. If anyone has a burning question, they can just paste it in the chat.
Oh, I see someone saying we do a coffee talk each week and just talk about stuff. That is really cool. I think that feels to me something that's happening in a lot of places, like this idea that we're just going to open up our screens and sort of have a tea time together or whatever and not have an agenda and not have a meeting, just be. I think that's incredibly powerful. This chat flows so fast. It's like watching a highway. Book clubs, happy hours. Ooh, yeah, that's a good one. My power went out. That's not good. Will we ever play baseball again? Yeah, there's some genuine hope. By July 1st, there's some hope that they're figuring out a way to do it.
Someone had asked about the vulnerability slide that you put up just now.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted to see it back again.
You mean this sort of big picture one?
I think that's what it was.
Yeah.
It definitely we're talking about the pink, I think.
Thanks for calling it a slide. I think Zoe will be very pleased. It's a really nice slide. It has animation. Watch the animation. Here it goes.
It's very professionally done.
It's very well done. Oh, she's good. She's seriously good.
Someone asked where I got the background from. You can just Google Zoom's background. It has like 100 backgrounds to pick and choose.
Raul, would it be possible for you to sort of filter out any ideas that people are suggesting and then share them back to the group from the chat? Like,
not at this time. What we'll do for you, Dan, is at the end of the meeting, we can give you the whole entire chat log, but there's no way to like filter.
Okay.
Like there's not much we can do in that point.
What's my favorite bobblehead? I'm going to have to go with Frankie there. He's looking good.
So Dan, we had one question earlier on, which was, does all of this need to come from the top, or is there something that you can do kind of in the middle?
No, in this moment, the top's important. There's a real, it really matters a lot, but especially at this moment, there's this, we're seeing now culture are the relationships around us, right? I mean, there's all kinds of things, especially now. And I think one of the most powerful ways people in the middle can affect culture is by organizing and supporting an idea exchange. An idea exchange, getting together with another organization that is like yours to talk about what's working, what's not, what you could do better. An organization that's maybe parallel to yours, not competitive, but I know at the Cleveland Indians, we've had these great exchanges with like the doctors at the Cleveland Clinic, surgeons, we're both performing under pressure. Let's talk about that. What's working, what's not. We've had exchanges with the military. We're both creating these teams, these cohesive teams. How do you do it? How should we do it? And especially in this age of COVID, everybody's got these new challenges.